While I'm often running many campaigns at the same time, at any given time, one of them is my main campaign. And right now, and usually, that is a campaign I call Kingmaker. We called it that because back in the day we were playing Pathfinder, and I described to my players how I wanted to run a political campaign where everyone went around, making kings, ruling a nation, conquering land, a political campaign. And one of my players said, "Oh, so kind of like Kingmaker." And I went, "Yeah, sure," not knowing it was an adventure path, which it later turned out there is an adventure path. There's a video game, or two of them. And Kingmaker 1 is something we played back in Pathfinder days, almost 10 years ago now. We finished up that campaign, and 2 years later, we started a new campaign called Kingmaker Legacy. Kingmaker Legacy devolved or changed or evolved or whatever into Kingmaker The Last War, which we sort of refer to now retroactively as Kingmaker 2 or Kingmaker The Last War. And about a year ago now, that campaign finished up, and I started a new campaign called Kingmaker Everlasting, or Kingmaker 3.0. 3.0 took place about 27 years after Last War ended, and features a new group of characters and also a slightly changed group of players. One of the players, Gvusted, didn't return for Kingmaker 3. He sort of bounced off of the more political elements, but liked the story and roleplay elements, so he was never really super into the very nitty-gritty, granular details of running a domain. And I knew for my third entry into Kingmaker, my third time trying this kind of campaign format, I wanted to go more into that. I talked to him about it, and he eventually decided that he wanted to, bail out of that. He was like, "Nope, that's not for me." And that was kind of a blessing for me, actually, because that meant I could invite my girlfriend, AB, to come play with us. She'd been playing Octavia, something I'd been running while running The Last War. And I have videos on that on the Patreon here. Part of Daði's Diaries is Octavia and Kingmaker Everlasting. And when we started Everlasting, I reached back out to Gvusted, and I said, "How would you like to continue playing your character, Rollo, for a bit longer, but play by post?" So every now and again, we'd just text each other over Discord, I describing scenes and him describing how he reacts, because at the end of The Last War, he said he wanted his character to go into Atraxian politics. Atraxia had been a main sort of ally of the players in the Last War, and they were kind of an essential part of it, but they were always this morally gray force, right? They had policies that the players hated, policies that are repugnant, but at the same time, they were rich and wealthy and had a strong military. And he wanted his character to spend the rest of his life trying to reform that place into something he could believe in. And I thought that was a really cool idea, and I figured let's try and play through some of that, because the politics of the nation of Atraxia are going to feature heavily in Everlasting, while mostly what they're playing is out there in the boonies in Loggers County, which is this vast, untamed forest, mountain, river, wilderness, and kind of harkens back to the Kingmaker adventure path from Pathfinder. It's got hexes and hex crawls, domain management, armies, that kind of stuff. So I started texting Gvusted, and we started talking about what his campaign would look like, what kind of character he was, what he was doing. And he said one of the first things he wanted to be focusing on is making sure the Empire fell and they were able to build something else. And over the time, we'd come to discover that this was the Atraxian Reformation. And I think there's probably no better way of introducing you to Kingmaker Everlasting than by talking about a solo session I just finished running with Rollo. Technically, this is the 92nd session of Kingmaker Everlasting, but I also count all the solos I do, and I do a lot of them. I think we're now up to about 48 solo sessions or something like that. The Last War ends in the year 1423, and Kingmaker Everlasting starts in 1450. This solo session I ran for Gvusted took place in 1431. Over the course of playing play-by-post, he had served both as a temporary ambassador from the Atraxian Republic to the Southern Confederate Union. He had worked as a legislative liaison for the president of Atraxia, President Trevor Rosenthal, and it is now the first term of that presidency when a crisis comes up. And here's the premise. The president is away on a diplomatic summit and is currently marching through a part of a continent where spells and magic behave kind of oddly, and they're not able to get telepathic communication through. And the vice president, Rollo's uncle, Robert Demilius, has just gotten on a boat and is sailing across the continent to Astarion, where he's going to have another diplomatic summit. And in the meantime, the chief of staff of the Obsidian Palace is in charge. Technically, this should invoke the line of succession. We'll talk about that in a second. But the premise being that the chief of staff is busy, and then a political foreign crisis comes along, and Rollo needs to be basically running the crisis. I wanted to run an adventure where he's kind of in the White House Situation Room during, a foreign rebellion or an embassy crisis, like the Iran hostage crisis or something like that. I wanted to put him into morally compromising positions, and I wanted him to think about what mattered to him, and I wanted him to really be faced with a bunch of options from a bunch of advisors, and then everybody telling him what he could do, and then him being able to either pick and choose or mix and match, or maybe coming up with whole new schemes. Now, he was a 20th level rogue, so I told him, we're not really playing D&D. You're still playing your character, and your character is still a D&D character, and if I ask you to make a roll, you'll use those stats. But I probably won't. And it turns out I didn't. This adventure in 1431 will have an effect and a knock-on effect going forward, and it'll create more adventures for him to play by himself, and eventually his character in 1450 will meet the player's characters, the new Kingmaker Everlasting characters in 1450, and that'll create a new adventure in 2 years' time or something, I don't know. But right now, we're just playing this adventure, and I wanted to run this solo session, and I wanted to tell you folks about it because I think it's kind of a good on-ramp into the kind of stuff I get up to with Kingmaker Everlasting. These are my session notes. If you want to watch a video about how I did them, I already made a video on Obsidian and how I use it to create session prep there. But for now, we're just going to talk about this session. I had a little introduction in terms of my table rules, and then I went right into the opening monologue. We both suited up for this one. He showed up in a 3-piece, and he was like, are you just going to wear sweatpants? And I was like, no. And so I went inside, and I suited up. We sat down because we wanted to feel kind of like, important political people. We got suit and ties. It also was good for fidgeting with. You could adjust your tie or put your hands in your pockets, and it was a little bit of a LARP because my whole living room has this map on the wall, and I was like, there is a map like this in the consultation room. Hang on, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The adventure starts with the same opening monologue every Everlasting session starts with, and I tell him it's Sunday on the 11th of Monsoon, 1430, when Ronald Olivier, yes, that's Rollo's full name, received summons to the Obsidian Palace. That is this massive palace built by an ancient great worm dragon that sits in the heart of Blackguard, and it's also where the executive branch comes from, or where it's organized. His uncle, the vice president of the Atraxian Republic, is being sent to meet with representatives in Astarion, and he's been called to the Obsidian Palace. And then I ask him where he lives, how he commutes, just to sort of give him a moment to kind of place himself, and then I immediately continue on with a monologue describing the Obsidian Palace in great detail, how it's been invaded over the years, how there's always some crisis, and it's always at the center of it. Different factions over the course of history have put their mark on it, whether it's the Elven Nathaniel Empire, the more recent Oldfield Empire, or now the Atraxian Republic, where the Obsidian Palace no longer serves as the home of an ancient red dragon, or as the home of an emperor, but as the home of the president and all of the executive branch. He travels across the Shard Lake and into the city itself. There is a security checkpoint with the Knight Empirical, or the Empirical Guard, and they escort him inside. They take his weapons. He meets his personal guard, Amand Alexander. This is a character he met during PlayPy Post, and he's led towards the vice president's office. And the vice president, the VP, Robert, his uncle says that he's going on this mission. He's going, he's got to leave for a while, and that they don't want to invoke the line of succession, because the Chancellor of the Parliament, the first Chancellor, John Reynolds, is currently in the middle of a crisis with the Supreme Court. He passed a law called the Reformation Act, which kind of created the presidential executive branch, and the Supreme Court, being pressured by the royalist political faction, is thinking it might not be constitutional. So they're going to make him work for it, right? And the vice president knows if he goes and pulls in John Reynolds to serve in the executive office, he won't be able to fight this constitutional battle, and that might upend the entire presidency. So he's got to not invoke the line of succession, because John Reynolds will recuse himself, and at that point, the chief of command of the armed forces, Everett Burnside, will be in charge. And Everett Burnside is a bit of a war hawk. That's how I set up the premise. I basically tell him, listen, nobody can be in charge right now but you. So whatever happens in this session, you have to be in charge. And he took that like a champ. He was like, all right, let's do it. He spent some time with the Chief of Staff, Ian Schofield, who I kind of imagine as Ian Mercer from Pirates of the Caribbean, the guy who works with Cutler Beckett. Cutler Beckett is basically the president, Trevor Rosenthal. It's kind of the same character. Schofield talks about how incredibly busy he is and how much there is on his desk, and we literally see piles of paper, and I described to him all the crises facing the executive office at this time. There's a Supreme Court appointment. There's the Supreme Court battling this bill. There's a fire that broke out, and the Bureau of Counterintelligence is looking into investigating whether or not there was a foreign power responsible. There's an audit that the Bureau of Revenue Audits wants to look into the largest corporation in the country, but the Secretary for Commerce, Alex Greer, who's this kind of young business upstart and is actually kind of a brilliant political mind, but he tells him, don't go investigate Banner Ventures because there will be economic blowback, and he's kind of worried about a recession. There's a surplus that's drying out, and they're projecting that the surplus is going to turn into a deficit over the next decade, and he's worried about a bank run. So there's a bunch of politics in here. This isn't D&D, right? We're talking about basically, this is kind of inspired by the West Wing or something like that, where we meet Leo and Josh comes into Leo's office, and Josh has an issue, and Leo's like, listen, I got these 50 things to deal with. So I had to create some things that the Chief of Staff could cite as being problems throughout the session. They get a knock on the door, and the Undersecretary for Intelligence is waiting in the executive office. And you can see there's a hyperlink. I'll click on it. The Undersecretary for Intelligence is an unofficial member of the President's cabinet and in charge of operating the International Intelligence Committee, often abbreviated as the IIC. They are a bunch of spies. And the current head of the IIC is Mansfield, Caroline Deborah Mansfield. She stands in the office. She says, I thought I was going to brief the Vice President. Chief of Staff says, he's already left. The spy says, I know that. Of course he does. She said, I thought you were going to delay him by a couple of hours. He said, well, then he would have been late to the meeting and by a couple of hours, so we decided that he should arrive on time for once. But it turns out that there is an embassy, an Atroxian embassy, in a dwarven city called Harkut Valdraz, which the city is not a part of Atroxia. It's on a different continent, but they have an embassy there. And the city and the region, in fact, the whole continent, might collapse into civil war. And we've got Atroxian soldiers, Atroxian embassy staff, Atroxian clerks, administrators, ambassadors, all in the middle of all of this. And then Ian says, start from the beginning. And at this point, Gustav, the player, is just sort of listening to these characters talk. He knows that I'm about to hand over control completely to him eventually. I said as much at the beginning. I was like, the president's gone, you're in charge. And he was like, okay. And then I tell him what's going on. I describe the Draskut Federation, how it's a large continental republic, and it's in shambles. The economy is failing. People are poor, very, very poor after the war. That rhymes. The Thane, Kuvak Cragbane, said he would hold a public referendum on whether or not to declare independence from the Federation, but the Thane died last week, and his son and heir, Thane Vazog, said there will be no referendum, and that Theltak should remain a part of the Federation. Mansfield says they're investigating if the son is of a different mind, the new Thane, or if it's a genuine political opinion. They suspect somebody else might be involved, but they don't have the secure, proper intelligence yet, so they're going to bet it. There's an Atroxian embassy, a secure building, something of a fortress. It's got cannons and embassy guard, but most of the people in there are just regular staffers. They have a PAX machine, that is a press of arcane communications. It's basically this way to send and receive letters from the embassy. They can do it once per day, and it takes a while, and that's about it. And then there are some other factions on the street. There is a faction of fundamentalists who want to stay in the Federation. Ward fundamentalists, they're religious fanatics. And they're beating up people, they're kicking people around, they're being very violent because the protesters are walking around saying they want a referendum and the fundamentalists are escalating. But the protesters are all funded by the business clan, the Bazan trade clan, who has relationships with the nearby major corporations. And then the IIC is also investigating whether somebody else is messing with this, but they don't think so. There's no credible connection, they say. So then they take him into the consultation room. And this is where the session properly begins. He gets escorted into the consultation room. Ian Schofield, the chief of staff, says, I got 50 things to deal with. And Gustav literally takes off his jacket, leans on the chair and says, I can handle this. And he goes, okay, thank God, and leaves. And then I just describe a bunch of people around the table and how they want to deal with the situation. We have a general who wants to go to war. He wants to go send troops and land there, secure the embassy by force, and then they could figure out what to do about independence or not later. He's an interventionist. And yeah, he's a warhawk. He wants to go to war. But also I try and make sure I render these characters somewhat realistically. So I had to think, why does he believe in these things? Well, it turns out he thinks that there is going to be another war. The last war, he says, is a phrase in Parliament that was just surpassed this year by a new phrase, the next war. The phrase the next war got spoken more than the last war. And he's nervous that that somebody's going to be starting another war. And the last one was so devastating that he wants to make sure they can stop it. If something's about to happen, if the whole Federation is going to shatter into civil war, he wants to make sure that he's got peacekeepers on the ground that can keep things in bounds. Now, me, Daði, I don't know if that's the correct political opinion, but I know that's what he believes. We got Alex Greer, the Secretary for Commerce, and his concern is the recession. If Draskut collapses, Atroxian businesses and local people will be hurt the most. He cites a stat saying that if unemployment goes up 1%, 250 people die, which is a real stat in the real world. I've adjusted it to match Atroxian population numbers. There's the spy master is here, Mansfield. There is a Secretary of Foreign Affairs, a Deputy Secretary called Marcus Fairchild. There is a Missions Administrator for Special Tactics Branch. This is their spec ops, their elite operatives. I prepared an adventure with one of the members of the Special Tactics Branch on stream, where the expeditionary group went on a whole adventure in the last war in Venkara, a different dwarven continent. And then there is Derek Hawley, the Secretary for the Arcane. Atroxia has an issue with the Arcane. They have an issue with spellcasters in general. There was a crisis, meteors rained from the sky, so they are all sort of on edge. So before I go talk about the operations, I want to talk about what I'm doing. I wanted him to determine the nature of the political opinions in the modern day Orathon, in modern day Atroxia. He said, when we ended the last war adventure, he said he wanted Atroxia to no longer be an interventionist power, that they don't do colonizing anymore. Well, fair, all right? It's a good political opinion to have. But what if I put him in a situation that most people would agree some intervention is needed? What if I put him in a situation where he's surrounded by people who say intervention is needed? The thing about politics is that there are so many minds at work that a lot of the time there's just a kind of force that is moving into a certain direction, and an individual person might be swept up in the force, or they might be able to resist. And a lot of the times when you talk to, or when you listen to like professional politicians talk about their work, a lot of the time you realize that the thing they're trying to do most of the time is cut against the grain a little at a time to try and shave themselves into a different direction. So I wanted to run a very political game. I wanted to have loads of opinions in the room, and I wanted to introduce these characters to him, because these are characters that matter in the rest of the everlasting adventure. But also, this isn't D&D. I basically made a war game. I tell him, here are available operations you can go do. And they are suggested by people, and then they have a little bit of a brief. Archelander 1 is a military operation, neutralizing hostile actors, secure the embassy, enforce peace, and safeguard the local rulers on behalf of Draskut. And the Chief of Command says, you should order me to activate this plan now, because it's going to take them a while to sail there. In 5 days, we could have half of the fleet there, and another 5 days, the rest of the fleet, because the ships are slower. So he says, you should tell me to go there now, because if you decide you need the army in 6 days, and you haven't given me this order, you cannot act. There will be nothing you can do. And then what do? I have a d20 table. If you tell them to invade after 5 days, what happens? You just roll a d20 and consult the table. On a natural 20, they take control of the city. That's it. That was it. You've done it. 17 or higher, they take control of the ports and the embassy, but with minor casualties. 10 or higher, the invasion progresses, and you roll again tomorrow. 9 or lower, invasion halts, slow again tomorrow. 4 or lower, suffer minor casualties. Further Archelander rolls are with disadvantage, natural 1. The fleet sustains heavy casualties and retreats. And then, in order for this to kind of be a cascading war game, I have a modifier table that tells me, depending on what else is going on, what modifiers might apply. Are there hostile factions in the city? Are the hostages safe? Has the invasion progressed or has it halted? So slowly, if you just keep rolling, this +1, if you keep succeeding, will eventually make it so that you get quite likely to take over the city. On the last day, when the whole whole fleet arrives with all of the ships, you just make one roll, and that determines the outcome. And I think the same modifiers apply. Yeah, same modifiers. Now, he didn't like this option. He was like, we're gonna send the ships close, but we're not gonna send them to blockade. We're gonna try and not escalate. Because another thing I told him is that tensions are rising every day, and I have a different metric for tensions. I'll show you in a second. There's an operation for clandestine operations, right? They call it Operation Letter Opener, and they want to send in a sandbagger, a spy. The spy would gain intelligence, utilize asymmetric warfare, psyops, and other dirty means of advancing the Atroxian agenda. And there's a roll table, and you can just send him to go do stuff. And the reason why you wouldn't want to send him every day is you get a +1 bonus for each day spent planning. So if you keep him planning for a little bit and then send him, you get a bonus. The Deputy Chief of Staff of Secretary Foreign Affairs says, hey, what if we send diplomats to the New Thane? Send more diplomats into danger. But it would lower tension. So doing it right at the start, not that smart. Doing it later might be smart. Targeted sanctions. Greer says we should sanction them, we should punish them a little bit, and then we should demand a meeting and then if we get the meeting, we can lift the sanctions. Greer's much more of a modern politician in this way. He's thinking about hurting their wallets. Operation Snakehead, send in the irregular warfare group to go kill one of the factions. Operation Scalpel Structures, the expeditionary group, here they are sent to secure the embassy, rescue the hostages, and evacuate him from the city. And then I told him, I didn't tell him this part actually, I wrote down what happens if he goes himself. He's a 20th level rogue. He could do incredible things, but he never decided to go because basically if he went, then nobody would be commanding the situation, and he probably would have gotten fired. That is disobeying an order and going rogue. But I reduced it down to one roll. It's not a D&D adventure. So if he leaves, you just roll a D20, see what happens. I then created a day-by-day table, and every time tension goes up, if it goes to certain intervals, things happen. And at 12, a civil war starts. The whole continent. Then I wrote down a little bit of what else could happen. Somebody could get shot at the embassy. The harbor would be guarded unless the Navy is present. So if the Navy isn't visible, then it's got to be even harder to invade if he has to. Somebody tries to kill the Thane. And then I got my postmortem notes at the bottom about what actually happened. But I'm going to run you through it real quick. He starts off by ordering the fleet to go and make their way towards the location, but not to be visible. And he decides to send in the spy. Get the spy to get some intelligence. Now, there's a chance that if you get a natural 20, the spy automatically makes the next covert operation succeed. But he's mostly here because he wants the modifiers for covert ops to go up. And then he just kind of holds back. The spy doesn't make any progress on the first day. He meets with Morgan, who's another player character from the last war. She kind of started this federation and hasn't really worked. It's been economically failing. If you haven't caught on already, the analogy here is the Balkans and Balkanization. This is just a simulation of what it would have been like if America had a situation room at the time, which I'm sure they did, talking about what might happen and what the knock-on effects would be. And I wanted him to be put in that position. He talked about the idea of an attaché or about sanctions. He dismissed them. And then tensions keep increasing every day. And on the third day, Oldtime, the nearest neighbor, closes the borders and puts the Platinum Army on ready alert on the border. And the independence movement gains traction across the continent. And suddenly he perks up and he's like, holy shit, they're going to go to war. A war might start. And then he says, all right, let's go take out the Ord fundamentalists. Let's go initiate covert operation Snakehead. Let's go kill the fundamentalists because they are the ones raising the tension. And he's right. At the start, he kind of wanted to see if there was a way to let the independence movement have their vote because that's the democratic will of the people. But he couldn't foresee a way to guarantee that without either assassinating the Thane, invading, or something else. He was just stumped. He didn't know what to do. So he decided, well, they're the ones raising the tension, and I don't want a war to start on my watch. So let's cut it out. He'd gotten a brief from the president, who set Rollo some goals. Goal number 1, secure the embassy. Failing that, the staff. Goal number 2, don't pull us into a war. Goal number 3, stabilize the region and avoid an economic depression. This is kind of how war games work. You give someone an assignment with a first, second, and third objective. I figured I'll just give that to him, and then the president manages to get that message through, but nothing else, so Rollo just has to go follow this direction. Snakehead goes in, destroys the fundamentalists. The clandestine operator gets a natural 20 on the roll, and the covert op automatically succeeds. Now, the reason he got a natural 20 is because he had advantage. And it says down here, you can roll with advantage if the operation permits civilian casualties. So the spy got caught and had to kill somebody, which meant he has to roll a d3 and there's a chance tensions increase. And they do. And Snakehead isn't completely successful. It's successful but exposed. So people know Atroxia assassinated some people, and then they find some more bodies. So tensions shoot up. And the next time he shows up, we hear that the protests turn violent. Covert ops have a -1. Somebody at the embassy staff has been shot. Theltak is isolated by trade. So tensions are very high. But at the moment, they're not continuing to rise. He uses that opportunity to send the new attaché, put him into danger, and talk to the new Thane. And he gets a middling roll. So I noticed here on my table, I had a range missing because I just designed this random thing and had nobody read it over or anything because I figured I'll figure it out when I'm running it. And he got a 12. An 11 or lower is unsuccessful. And 14 or higher is successful. So what's 10 through 13? Doesn't say. So I decided to kind of steal this halt progress mechanic. And I said, okay, the diplomat is talking, hasn't been killed, and hasn't made any progress. Right? He's still there. But because he got a natural 20 on the clandestine check, the next covert op succeeds, so he sends in the expeditionary group to utilize some tunnels the spy found, pull the staff out, and now he's ready for anything. And now he's negotiating with live ammo, right? If the Thane kills his diplomats, he's going to have to retaliate. This is something the general, Burnside, talked a lot about. He was saying, the reason we can do what we do, the reason we can meddle in other affairs, the reason we can send diplomats around the world, not everybody does that, is because people respect and, to a degree, fear Atroxian retaliation. So if we send in a diplomat and he gets assassinated, and if our embassy staff isn't safe, you will have to order troops on the ground. He resents that, Rollo. He says, you are not in charge of this situation. And the general simply says, yes, sir, whatever you say. I'm just here to give counsel. And I think that got to him. I think Rollo was really anxious that he would have to put troops on the ground. But he doesn't. The Thane succeeds. The diplomat succeeds negotiating with the Thane. The Secretary of Foreign Affairs arrives in the situation room, in the consultation room, and has a chat. And they basically set their policy for the next few years. They decide to increase diplomatic presence and try and keep Draskut in the Federation if they can, but support the Thane. And this kind of works. He manages to hold the nation together for a bit. I tell him everything's going to go fine. There is a nation called Sindruk, which is nearby. They do pull out of the Federation, but everything else stays together. And he spends a bunch of money on foreign aid. And eventually there is a recession, like Greer predicted. But slowly but surely, the Federation heals while this administration is in office. What he doesn't know is that in a little bit, in 8 years' time, a different political party is going to be in charge, and this is kind of going to collapse, which is also another sort of thing about the reality of politics. He did his best work, but at a certain point, he's going to be voted out and be in opposition, and he's going to watch as somebody else screws up what he set up. That was the session. It was a lot of fun. He sort of had this whole, turning point. He was going to follow the independence movement. He was going to support them, but then he got really anxious about a war. He was like, I don't think there's a way for these people to get independence without a conflict breaking out. So he thought, I better stop it. I better stop it before a war starts, because he was terrified of the war. And I think that's sort of true about Atroxian politicians in general. The last war was so devastating that most of them were willing to do anything to avoid it. And anything turns out to be quite a lot. In this case, it was state-sanctioned terrorism. If you can't tell, I had a lot of fun running this. Thanks for watching Daði's Diaries. Your support on Patreon here means the world to us. And until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.